parallel, there was always a deep yearning to be famous. I knew I was good at what I did, and I was like, I need everyone to know that I'm this good. And it happened. You know, I became a celebrity, and I had my wrestling with that relationship with celebrity and the ego, and it really kind of like, you know, for a point there, took control of me, and I had to wrestle it back down and understand.
Yeah, so checking out your work and the reception from your fans, talking about how impactful and moving your music is and the energy and the vibe in your performances. I was like, okay, that's interesting, because I've seen comments around artists where like, yeah, that was such a dope party.
Sure.
And then they go home and they're like, yeah, that was a great party.
Yeah.
But when you go to something and you're moved by it, that's a whole different feeling.
Yeah.
Is that something you strive for every time, or just something that's sort of naturally happened?
I think a little bit of both. I think my goal at first when I was younger was subconscious, and it's become a lot more of like a conscious thing as I've gotten older, has been to molecularly like change the way people feel and move after they've listened to my music or if they've come to come to a show, and for the better, you know, and to be able to really shake something within someone's soul. And I think where it starts is for me, music is just like a deeply cathartic mechanism. It's something that allows me to heal and express. And I just learned early on, for some reason, like for me, there's been like a karmic hangover, I call it. So there's been a certain pain, not just pain, but an angst and something within myself from as far back as I can remember. And I've had music as my way of examining that, trying to figure out what it is, and also just externalizing it, you know? And I think the byproduct of that, in terms of when I share this music or I share a message or something, is it has a similar impact on the people that are receiving it. And so it's definitely now a very conscious, like, this is what I believe my purpose is with regards to music and my life. But it started off as very much like an internal exercise and just figuring myself out. And that has triggered the path, for sure.
When you talk about it coming from a place of pain and angst, for as far back as you can remember, have you figured out where that comes from, or what spawned all of that you still use that as your core or your raison d'etre type of thing?
I think one major thing, which is not on the deepest level, but still deep, but like the outer layer of it is the identity crisis, which for me came with being an Indian man or kid growing up in the States. You know, I was born in India, and we moved to California when I was a year old. And so much of my confusion and chaos came from not really understanding my position in Western society all the way. Obviously having the things that I, you know, held on to in Western society, but then also feeling deeply, deeply rooted to my Indian culture. There was just a bit of it always felt like, you know, like when you're on a train, and this has actually never happened, but the idea of like a train almost tipping over but not quite doing, just like being is teetering on the edge. That's what so much of growing up felt like. So I think that is the first like trigger point that has, but then beyond just that, I think, like I said, I use the phrase karmic hangover. I'm Hindu, and I believe in reincarnation, and I do believe that, you know, my soul has existed in different forms before. And I feel like some of it is just, you know, holdover from the past. And I think that's like the deepest kind of source point for the angst or the questions. And I said pain and angst, but I think what I've clarified it as over the last maybe like 10 years is there's just a lot of deep questions, unanswered questions within myself, you know.
Like what?
Existentially mostly, of again, what is my position in the universe? Why am I here? What is the significance of what I'm doing and what my purpose is? You know, and also I think the biggest question is what is the source of all this? And what's the universal kind of truth that exists within everyone that binds me to the rest of the universe, the rest of the people that I either do or do not come in contact with. But, you know, like I am of the belief that there's like a collective energy that we're all a part of. So I think the biggest question is what is that source point? What is that universal truth? And how do I get there? I think the angst and the pain when I was younger, maybe, and I'm figuring this out as I'm talking to you,
great,
is I think a lot of that came from, you know, not even knowing what the question was, knowing that there's a yearning within myself, but not knowing what that yearning was for.
A level of self-awareness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, being self-aware is a beautiful thing, especially once you're able to start expressing it and putting it down into some sort of, in my case, sonic format. But self-awareness can also be a very, can be a deep rabbit hole when you don't necessarily have the means or the mechanisms to channel, you know? And I think that's what it was for me as a kid. But my mom started me off with Carnatic music, which is South Indian classical music, when I was 3.
Okay.
And it's a deeply spiritual form. And I was a regular kid, you know, running around, not really having the patience to sit down in lessons and whatnot. But there would be these moments, and I think I spoke about it while on stage last night, but I would come back home from school after having a day that just felt like it was especially hard or again, confusing or whatnot. And I would practice, and there'd be these moments of just like transient transcendence where I'd feel like I was hovering above the ground for a moment.
What's that like?
Man, it's the best feeling in the world. It's the thing that always made me believe that in the existence of God and also the existence of this universal truth. You know, like somehow I knew that the fact that those moments occurred for me, that signaled that there's something far beyond myself or any human being that was a warmth, you know, like those moments felt like trust falls and I was being held. And at first, when I was much younger, it was such a mysterious feeling and I got addicted to it in a beautiful way. But it would always be transient. It would come and go. And then randomly some other time it would happen again. And I really strung those moments together. To have like this deep reason to keep pushing forward.
Yeah.
You know, outside of the regular, you know, desires of a kid or a teenager or a young adult or whatever, these moments really allowed me just, it's like North Stars. It's like, all right, just
like
keep finding those. Yeah, keep finding those. They all kind of were strung together to form a compass.
Your path.
Yeah, 100%.
Do you feel like you still have an illuminated path in front of you?
Yeah, I think even more so now than ever.
Why?
Those moments that used to be transient before, I've really kind of put in the work with my craft over the last decade and a half to figure out a way to extend them beyond just transient moments. Now it feels like I can have a whole show or a whole practice session or something where I'm in that state. And again, it doesn't happen every time, but I've figured out ways to intentionally and consciously like be able to I've found my tool set, you know, to be able to tap into that. And with that, being in that state for longer than just like this, it has opened my certain portals up in terms of like what the possibilities are of what I can do when I do these shows. I look out and there's always folks where you can just see them in the same kind of transfixed state that I'm in. And when that happens, like, oh, this is this is beyond just something that makes me feel good.
Mm.
This can have a profound impact on other individuals. And I think that's what the biggest illumination of the path has been, is the fact that, we always talk about, I don't know if everyone does, but for me, it's something I've always thought about in the abstract, the idea of being selfless and really not getting rid of the ego, but being able to use the ego consciously instead of it using you. And that has always been a concept that was in the abstract for me, where I talk about it poetically or kind of like wax poetic about it.
Mm-hmm.
But especially, we've been on the road now for about 2 weeks doing this run for the album. And it's really showed me, it's just affirmed that this artistic pursuit for myself is not all about me, and that there is a selflessness in it, and that's been my biggest kind of, I've been able to really rally around that and be like, oh, the deep meaning that I've always felt my expression has is not just me being pretentious, and that there's really something to it, and that it does do something for people. And that's it. I think like this process of self-discovery and then externalizing the self-discovery to allow others to resonate with it and do with it as they do, it's been the most encouraging feeling.
I'm curious about the ego part. Correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first album in English.
Correct.
Yeah. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
a huge
you.
accomplishment.
Appreciate that.
To go on a tour after dropping an album, seeing the reception on socials, live in person, city to city, living the lifestyle.
Yeah.
The ego can get carried away very quickly in the wrong direction.
Sure.
And when you talk about using the ego instead of letting the ego use you, how do you do that?
I think my career has had a very interesting trajectory. Like I said, I grew up on Carnatic music. That's the form that raised me. I dove into the world of like soul, R&B, and all that when I was young, just self-taught in that way. But post-college, I had a big break in Indian films. I started singing for Indian films with A.R. Rahman in 2012. And that was a direction I never expected my career to go in, but it happened serendipitously, and I really kind of like took that left turn. And the last decade has basically been me kind of scaling that whole industry and making it to the very top of it and becoming quite famous. I'm so grateful that it happened, or my relationship with fame and celebrity occurred with music that I didn't write. Over there, I'm a playback singer, so I'm giving voice to songs composed by someone else and written by someone else.
And for those who don't know that, basically when you're watching a Bollywood film, for example, and the actors start lip singing,
correct,
you're the one that's actually singing.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And yeah, it kind of rose to dizzying heights in that world, and that was my exercise in really understanding ego, specifically with regards to me. As a kid, I had this spiritual kind of path with music, but in parallel, there was always a deep yearning to be famous. I knew I was good at what I did, and I was like, I need everyone to know that I'm this good. And it happened. I became a celebrity, and I had my wrestling with that relationship with celebrity and the ego, and it really kind of like, for a point there, took control of me, and I had to wrestle it back down and understand. So I think,
what would I have seen if I saw the ego winning?
I don't really know. I've always been really good at masking it. You know what I mean? It's never been like this outward thing. But I knew in my brain, because what I thought of myself in my head was I had, my head was bloated for sure. But because I was good at masking it, it was like this weird duality where I could tell that some of the stuff I was saying was phony. But in myself, I'm thinking something different. So it was like almost like this fake humility that I was putting forth in moments.
That can eat away at a person.
It did. And that's what really forced me to be like, yo, look at yourself in the metaphorical mirror and really kind of assess who it is you are, instead of having to play this game of of multiple identities. That was the impetus, you know what I mean? The fact that it was eating away at me, it was making it really hard for me to feel like I had a consistent identity that was just like me. I was kind of wearing these different hats in different contexts, and it was it was just detrimental to self. And I think it was also really causing a certain blockage in my artistic pursuit as well. So when I say, using the ego and not letting it control me, I do think the ego is an important part of a human being. In many ways, it's been, for me, the fire that really pushes me to strive for certain things or assert myself as like, this is who I am.
Yeah.
And I've learned to have that healthy relationship, to know this is the function of what it does. It cannot be the end all, On the other side, it can't be completely not present. It has a role to play.
So where are you now in that journey?
I think I'm just about at that point where I'm striking that balance where on my best days, I know exactly who I am. And because I know who I am, I'm able to have that, take a step back and be like, oh, this is, let's say there's a certain day where, and again, most of this stuff is internal, but a certain thought crosses my head that feels like it is, like if I have like a chip on my shoulder about something. I've learned to really mitigate that and just shake the chip off, because I've learned that doesn't do anyone any good, definitely doesn't do me any good. To have this sense of resentment or weight that comes from that kind of feeling. Where I am now is the understanding that I am a very powerful and important source of energy in human form, but I'm also like, things are not that deep sometimes. You can just chill. I don't have to take myself all that seriously every day. You know what I mean? Like,
that part's hard. It's harder than it sounds.
Especially when you've, made your artistic pursuit something that has a lot of weight to it. You know what I mean? Like
you feel there's a purpose, there's a meaning behind what you're doing, and you have to live up to that meaning that you've put together, essentially.
100%.
Yeah.
And that meaning is something that I believe is profound. But, and making this album is really what did it for me, man, where it has to be fun, too. I used to really romanticize this idea of the starving, it's like really struggling artist, like the whole Da Vinci thing. I romanticized that so hard when I was just starting college. And when I was at Berkeley in college, that's when I started writing music for the first time. So I was kind of trying to grab at what's my artistic identity going to be?
Finding your voice.
Yeah. And there was obviously the musical voice and the different cultural musical influences that I was pulling together. But then on the conceptual kind of in that space, I really just put this, again, this artist who's in pain kind of thing at the very core of who I was. And that drove so much of what I was doing for a while. And then I made this album, and for the first time, I really collaborated with other individuals. I met human beings that are now friends for life through the process of making this album. And making music just became this really fun exercise. Where
Relationship building,
lots of telling jokes, you know what I mean? Just 5 or 6 of us in the studio together, making music without any agenda or ego, or we were just there to make music. It was tail end of the pandemic, May or June of 2021, when I made my first trip to Minneapolis to work on this record. I made the trip out there very kind of just on a whim. I'd met a producer through Instagram. His name is Ryan Olson, who's Minneapolis based, and I'd never been to that city. So I just went out there just be let me see what's going on over here. Spent 3 days over there, and those 3 days changed my life. But we were just in the studio together, all of us. And I think for Yeah, for all of us, we hadn't gotten to be in a room with like other people in a while. So everyone was just excited to be in a room together, just making music. And it was this overwhelmingly positive, joyous experience. And it was this experience in relationship building, in opening myself up and being vulnerable with other individuals, and without a sense of fear, of judgment, or anything else.
Why is that part so important? The vulnerable part.
Oh.
I ask that because the ethos of this podcast is having conversations around pulling the curtain back on vulnerability.
Sure.
Destigmatizing that through vulnerability, there's strength, not
Sure.
weakness.
Sure.
So I'm always curious when someone talks about vulnerability to know why they specifically see vulnerability as a strength.
Yeah, I mean, I think as human beings, I feel like as we get older, we shroud ourselves, you know, and it's layers on layers over time. And it sometimes those layers act as like necessary shields, perhaps. But I think more often than not, it just kind of like those layers take us far away from the source of who we are. My only real pursuit right now is just to be as honest as I can possibly be. You know, every day, whether it be in music or in conversation, just in every way. And not for some like noble thing, but just because it's the easiest way to be happy. And I think opening yourself up, being vulnerable, is really more than anything else an exercise in deeply embracing oneself, not having the fear to be like, no, this is the depth of who I am. This is the most naked, most honest, most direct version of who I am. And what I've learned is life is crazy. There's so many forces externally that are constantly flying around, you know, and there's so many variables and turns. And for me, I want to be I don't want to be doing that stuff to myself internally. There's enough going on. I think for me to be able to really just walk through the good days and the bad days, the vulnerability, the being, you know, naked in that way, has just brought me the most peace. And I think that's, you know, for the longest time, my whole life has been this kind of reckoning of one, who am I? As I start to see glimmers of who I am, the inner battle of, do I want to show people this? Is it okay? Or
will I be received well?
Or judged? Or, you know, and you get to a point where you realize like most of the judgment is just judgment you're doing to yourself.
What's the most negative thing you've said to yourself?
Oh man, it goes deep. But to just maybe just encapsulate it, just that you're not worthy, you know, versions of that. And those versions go super deep in certain directions. But
that's a hard thing to not just to say to yourself, but to start to believe it and then get out of that.
Yeah, and the process of getting out of it is so, it's like this, you know, it's not a straight line. There's no,
Never is.
Because some days you feel on top of the world, other days you're like down, and it just takes a lot of re-engineering within yourself, of setting a foundation, a baseline of saying, no, you're worth it, and that is your baseline. Start from that point and build everything from there, you know. And that has been, and sometimes you get the blessing of these can be direct conversations within yourself, right? But there's also sometimes other mechanisms that undo these knots for you, you know. And again, the creation of this album was alchemic in so many ways. We made music that felt really magical. But for me personally, it undid so many knots without me even knowing. It was a process where we got hit with this creative wave. And sometimes when those creative waves hit you, they hit you in such a way that you have no choice but to surrender to them. Yeah. It's like the divine just comes down and be like, no, this is what you're going to do right now. So I wasn't thinking about a damn thing while making this album. I was just waking up and channeling every day, saying, okay, all I got to do is turn my mind off and receive whatever's coming and put it down. And we took about 8 months to finish the album, and coming out on the other side of it, I just felt that a lot of these knots and a lot of these pressure points and these internal blockages or whatnot that were really keeping me from myself started to come undone. And I'm still reacclimating, relearning myself right now. I think putting the project out and just releasing it into the world was big, but really kind of doing these shows has been those have been the points of deep clarity of like, oh, these knots have gotten undone. I am the fear of judgment, the am I worthy, is what I do on a daily basis. Is there some worth to it? Is there a purpose? I feel like my feet are very, very firmly planted right now.
So I want to challenge you for a moment. As an artist, there's a ton of external validation, which can become a slippery slope because then you start to internally validate based on the external.
Sure.
So when you talk about the shows are external validation.
Yeah.
There's fans who paid money to come see you, spent hours with you, cheered you on, and then left and signed up to your Spotify playlist, found your album, etc.
Sure.
Where's your line between the external and the internal validation? Where you're not masking it with the external.
I don't know if I'll say this. I don't know if there's a line between the two. I kind of have accepted them as one.
Okay.
But the masking of it has been something that I've taken off. Like just taking that out the picture. And I guess what I mean by that is I don't think I'm not using the energy or the validation that comes from the outside anymore to kind of like paint a layer around aspects of myself. What it feels like is at these shows, we're in one space together. On the best nights, it feels like the whole room is just like that feeling I felt when I was a kid of hovering above the ground. Like we're all doing that together. And the energy that I get from people, not even the ones that scream, which is also great, but the ones that are just like
locked in
and like I can see their soul and they can see mine. It feels like they give me beyond validation. They give me this like deep essential energy that I can internalize, and it just becomes a part of my my spirit, and I feel like I give them the same. And when that happens, there is really no barrier between how I feel about myself, how I feel about them, how they feel about me. It's just the collective energy thing. It comes back to that. And those moments feel like a real, just affirmation that belief that I have that, we are all interconnected is deeply, deeply true as fact and not just like something that I'm like pie in the sky talking about, So it goes in those moments, and that's why I think these last few weeks have been so special. It goes far beyond validation.
Yeah.
It just becomes a spiritual exchange where I walk off that stage and I don't... The feeling, and I've had shows in the past where I walk off stage being like, oh, I'm the shit. Like, I did that.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that.
No, it's good. But these shows, I walk off stage just feeling charged up. Like I just got like I'm a battery that just got got fed. And in those moments, I don't think about, oh, I killed that or this. No, it's just like you're just hovering on that feeling. I think the important thing to do is, the good thing for me is I've had, this decade of experience doing some really big shows, intimate shows, and the whole kind of spectrum in between is that energy can feel somewhat drug-like at sometimes when you come off stage, and you can start craving it in a way that's not healthy. But I have good people around me.
I'm glad you say that. That was my next question for you.
Yeah.
Was how do you protect the energy?
Yeah.
Because this is an industry, and from all the conversations I've had with other artists, this can be a very conniving industry.
Sure.
Right? Like you could run into some very bad people who have very bad intentions for you. And
Sure.
they want to take advantage of your name, your art. They just basically see you as money.
A commodity to use.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure.
So how are you protecting that? How are you keeping your circle so positive?
Yeah, I mean, I think just like having learned discernment over the years. My dad manages me. Okay. Which is a huge thing, because
that's always an interesting dynamic sometimes.
Oh, it's been interesting, but it's been it's the thing that keeps me the most grounded.
Okay. Lucky.
Yeah, straight up.
Yeah.
You know, it's a blessing. He obviously knows me deeply. And the good thing is with us, like our relationship growing up, you know, we really, we're very different individuals.
You and your dad.
Yeah, both of us. And, so we figured it out growing up. And then in this process, it's just a person that, one, he knows me deeply. Two, we both always know, like, what the potential of this is, right? So anytime I start to get a little carried away, I know there's one dude who's just like, all right, chill, like, there's more to do.
Yeah.
You know? And that has been and he's the most honest person I've ever met. So I know, like, when he's saying something, it's like, okay, it's there's no agenda, and it's coming from a place of pure honesty. So even if sometimes it doesn't sit right with me, I know when there's something that's been, like, when someone is, like, truly honest with you, even if you don't like what they're saying sometimes, you know the value in it, you know? So I think that has keeping me grounded. And then my own discernment of just, like, human beings, which I've just learned over the years. You know, after a point, you can read and tell when someone's spirit is kind and truthful and genuine and sincere. And my whole band, everyone that I move with, from the musicians to my engineer to the tour managers, it's just good people. That's like the baseline. Like, is there goodness in their heart? And there's been some musicians that I've worked with who are incredible musicians, like insane musicians, but their heart hasn't always felt like it's, maybe for them it's in the right place, but it doesn't necessarily, like, resonate with the way I operate. So, you know, I've had to move away from some of those individuals and just really, again, practice this, just being very discerning about what I feel like I need, what are my anchor points, in terms of just, like, my code of ethics and all that, and building everything around that. Like I mentioned, my pops, my mom is my music teacher to this day. My sister, she's a couple years older than me. She's a professor at Colorado College, but also an artist, a dancer, a musician herself. So, you know, like, this is my core unit. One, they're all my best friends. And two, they're people that I strive to be as good as. And that has allowed me, you know, I've never... Well, I've had moments when I was younger where I felt like a balloon that was kind of flying away. But as I've matured and I've really understood the value of the people around me and what they really mean to me, and I've learned not to take people for granted, that's the thing that's really just kept me grounded, and it's allowed me to protect my energy, you know, and really not be not feel like I have to control everything, because I have these folks that are gonna look out and also just keep me grounded, remind me who I am and why I'm doing this, for sure.
What happens in your relationship with your father, who's also your manager? Where's the my dad is talking versus my manager is talking?
It's all one thing.
Always.
It's all one thing. It's like we're on this journey together, And for me, for better or worse, the personal and the professional are the same. I don't even look at it like that anymore. Where because like I'm not dealing in something that is inorganic. I'm dealing in music.
Yeah.
So for me, there really is no line between the personal and the artistic. It's all coming from the same place. And I know I've heard that there's a necessity to demarcate, between your personal life and the professional life. But again, coming back to the idea of in this artistic pursuit, I don't believe that there's any barrier. I think when you start to really siphon off yourself and like silo parts of your life, that can be very unhealthy. And I've dealt with that in terms of my identity, in terms of being Indian American and having multiple identities within myself and really trying to keep them apart for a long time. I learned how detrimental that was to myself.
Are those identities fused now?
It just feels like a spectrum, like a kaleidoscopic spectrum of who I am.
So if someone listening, watching this is currently struggling with their identity in the same way, they move to another country, they're not sure if, in your case, for example, they're not American enough and they're not Indian enough, right? Depending on where they're questioning this.
Yeah.
What advice could you give those folks to find a way to get to where you're at, the level you're at of just being comfortable with the fact that it is a spectrum?
Sure. Well, I'll speak to my experience and say this. I was clinging on so hard to this need to keep these worlds apart within myself. And I thought that was the way to really protect each identity. And it's just a fallacy thinking in that way that, like you're different people within yourself. I don't even know if I'd call it advice, but my process is, and it hasn't been conscious all the time. Sometimes it's like just subconscious kind of through the process of living, certain things start to
fall into
dissolve
place,
or fall
sense,
into place, But if I could have been more conscious about it, what I think I would have told myself was, it's a futile exercise to try to divide yourself up into different people, like what's in Harry Potter, Horcruxes.
Yeah.
And we see what happens when that happens. And that it's the same thing.
You tear
though.
yourself apart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, in this attempt to try to hold close to yourself, like and really control these things within, you're gonna tear yourself apart. And what I would tell myself is that it is so much more peaceful just to accept yourself as a spectrum of all these different things. You don't have to just be one thing in one room and another thing in another room. You could be everything all the time. And it does get confusing, still. But I think the term that I always use, one, to describe this music, but first and foremost to describe myself, is just kaleidoscopic. I think what I'd say is it's beautiful to be able to enjoy oneself and embrace oneself as just all the shades of who you are. The beauty in terms of like when a light hits something a certain way on a certain day, it appears a certain way on another day. The light hits it another way. It's gonna, you know what I mean? And like that is so damn beautiful. And another big thing is like you don't have to try to be cool. I think that's the biggest thing. You know what I mean? Like, because like now
Some
that I
guys
think about
struggle
it,
with.
big time. It's like the
if you're not constantly cool or doing something cool,
you're somehow like
less than.
Yeah, and I think that now that we're talking is the biggest thing. Is like this need to appear a certain way.
Why do you think we do that as guys?
I mean, I'm sure so much of it is societal. the constructs that have been placed on these gender identities that men are supposed to be this way and appear this way, and
tough, unemotional, closed off,
yeah,
only to lead a life of suffering and
sure,
quiet, and then eventually it blows up one day.
for sure. And I think ultimately the onus is on each individual to realize that that whole societal construct is bullshit, I don't know if I'm allowed to curse or
You
not.
are.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it's I'll say this. I have found deep solace in finding my sensitivity and the tenderness within myself.
And there's something beautiful in that.
It's everything, man.
Yeah.
It's and that doesn't mean that you can't like fend for yourself and be hard when you need to be. And like those are still elements of self that I think are very important. But I think to be able to really do that, you need to know tenderness, you need to know warmth, you need to know vulnerability. Those are necessary to be able to tap into all aspects of who you are. I don't even look at it as like two different things. I think warmth, tenderness, kindness, vulnerability at the core as like your engine, as this power source that can then emanate outwards, and everything you do is going to be sourced in love and sincerity. And I think there's nothing more powerful, cool, whatever, than that is the real deal. Another thing, like there's the aspect of being a man. For me, being a brown dude growing up in Western society, it's just like
comes with its own complex layers.
Just never saw anyone as like an example in terms of like, I saw obviously my father, but I'm saying like in terms of like on the screen, on
people that look like you.
Yeah, nothing, and now it's starting to change, and I'm proud to be an agent of that change for the generation that's younger than myself. But for me, growing up in the 90s, we didn't see anything. So there was nothing to like strive towards. And in retrospect, I'm kind of grateful for that because it gave me this boundless playing field. Though there was a lot of identity crisis mixed in, I could dream up whatever. There was no blueprint, and there still isn't. We're really drawing this out as we go. But because there was nothing to look towards, I had to look to other cultures or whatnot and try to piece together what I thought cool was. And yeah, ultimately you realize just let that go. There's no need for it, because I think the most attractive thing, the most inspiring thing to be one is just deeply oneself, but also the word I always come back to, and again in this album that we made, it was at the very core of it, but sincerity. I think that's the most beautiful thing someone can be, and you can see it in someone's eyes, is when they're sincere, there's like this warmth that is just like deeply present. And yeah, coming back to like someone who might be feeling identity crisis, I think that is the thing. Just lean into sincerity, lean into yourself, lean into the warmth and the vulnerability that exists within yourself. And that is going to unlock most of the doors for you if you do it with a sense of like real purpose and discipline. That's another big one. I think these are not easy processes at all. They take the daily, like this is how I'm going to approach my life. And that's when I found myself having the most growth, when I dedicate. Because you can have one day where you're really on it, and the next day you're like, "Oh fuck all that." I'm
That's not feeling
it. But when the discipline I've learned is through my pursuit of Indian classical music, that really instilled in me a sense of rigor, and now I can use that rigor in all these different ways. But I think that discipline of waking up every day and saying, "No, this is how I'm going to approach my life. This is how I view the world, is how I view myself, and these are the baselines I've set for myself, and let's build on that." I think that discipline is also really important because it doesn't come easy, and doesn't just magically happen. It takes work,
I'm going to ask you to on the topic of advice and identity and, growing up, dealing with that constant tug of war. If you had an opportunity to talk to young Sid, right? You walk into your childhood bedroom.
Yeah.
He's sitting there dealing with all the emotions. What would you say to him?
That's a good question, man. Oh, man. I'd say stay the course. I'd say go a little easier on yourself, you know. And just like really lean into yourself. Stop trying to run away so much. I think I spent so much of my childhood, adolescence, coming back to what we're talking about before, just not believing that I was worthy or really kind of understanding, forget the music, but just like the brilliance and the beauty that existed within myself. I was always running away from it, always trying to rationalize to myself that I wasn't that. So if I were to come in contact with the younger version of myself at any stage, even like college, just trust in yourself and take the time to sit in silence and allow that to guide you. Be comfortable with that silence and just listen, instead of trying to run so much. I think I was always running, and the blessing that I had was music. It always kind of just brought me back. So I'd say sit still, don't be hard on yourself or as hard on yourself as you are. And then another thing, just like learn that discipline thing. You know what I mean? I feel like if I had dedicated, it's like you can't really ask that of like a 5-year-old. But I think once I started to, I think just believe that you're as good of a person as you are. I think I would have said that. There was, sorry, that had me in a chokehold for a quick second.
You don't have to apologize ever.
But I think that's what I would say. I would say that. And I also chill out. Things are going to be good. I think that'd be another one for sure.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, sir.
And thank you for sharing your time with me.
Oh, man, this has been a wonderful way to spend the morning, honestly.
No, it's been my pleasure, my honor. You do amazing things, amazing work, and you're in it for a good reason, which I always love to see, because I think a lot of people chase fame for the wrong reasons.
Sure.
And even though you openly admit that there was a part of you that chased the fame, the fact that you chased the fame, acquired the fame, and then still had the self-awareness to stop and go, this is not who I am.
Sure.
And change paths and go towards the thing that made you feel your most authentic self. Takes courage, takes discipline. It takes going through fear and shit and all of the doubts. You could have lived a cozy life and instead went, no, this is not who I am. I'm going to do something different.
Sure.
That's incredible. That's inspiring, man.
Thank
and I hope
you,
anybody who hears this, watches this, comes across your path in one way or another, gets just even a little bit of that, so that they can apply that in their own lives. And it makes me start to think about where I can apply something like that in my life. So thank you for sharing your time with me.
I appreciate that, man. I think if it's one thing that I've learned over this last decade and a half, like, my life has taken me in a bunch of different places, and I'm proud of all of it. It all makes me who I am, and I'm grateful to be where I'm at right now. I appreciate this conversation. It's been beautiful.
Well, it just means we have to do a part 2 one day.
Let's do it for sure. I'll be back for
Amazing.
sure.
Sid, thank you so much, brother.
Lots of love, brother. Thank you.
Thank
man.
you so much, everybody. Appreciate it.